Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. So I was kind of preparing this talk, and I thought I would give an artist talk on the theme of the exhibition, which is the divine musicality of nature. But actually, I think the most interesting thing that I could share is the journey that led to this exhibition, and kind of all of the pieces that have continually kind of come together to evolve into this vision, into this project, and into all of the works that are around us here and in one of the other rooms as well. So just the little kind of breadcrumbs that I've been following that have led to this. So I can kind of really trace the earliest stages of this work to 2021. At the time I was living in a little meditation hut at an ashram off the grid in northern British Columbia, 2 hours from Terrace. I was studying meditation and yoga and classical tantra, and a few of my ashram friends are here actually as well, which is really nice to see. And one of the things at that time, I'd been engaging in a daily meditation practice for a couple of years, and one of the things that I really started to notice after consistent practice was that I was, more and more able to listen to life rather than impose my expectations onto it. And sort of in that, I was able to really listen to the heart and listen to what felt alive for me and for my journey, and how life wanted to unfold through this body-mind complex. And I had written in my journal that year in 2021 this kind of vow that I would spend 1 year fully listening to the heart. And whether that led to something confusing or uncertain, even if it didn't make sense to the mind, I was like, I'm just going to dedicate 1 whole year to completely living from the heart, no matter where it leads. And that is kind of the first breadcrumb that has led me here. So one of the things that I noticed when I was living at the ashram was that a lot of what I was learning from spiritual traditions, from the great mystics and teachers of India, from the yogic tradition, from the tantric tradition, and from all of the sages that I was kind of contemplating and learning from, and then my own direct experience with dedicated meditation, I was noticing these correlations between that and what I had remembered from studying art history on my undergrad years prior, specifically with 20th century modern art. When the camera was invented, it kind of freed artists past representation. The artist wasn't confined to having to represent things exactly, to hold memory and to hold history. And so when the camera was invented, the artist was really free to kind of explore how color and form and composition can actually challenge form, and how we can use abstraction to evoke feeling and to widen perception. And so art started to take this deeper look at reality and the role that art could play in spiritual practice and deeper inquiry. And so I was like, this is a really interesting correlation, and so I kind of wanted to explore that intersection. And so if I was listening to the heart, I was like, wow, I feel this really strong pull to go to grad school to study these artists who had spiritual practices, who were deeply interested in spiritual life, and then how that manifests in visual language. How does visual language express sacred encounter, or how can art evoke deeper spiritual experience? How do those things relate? And so I decided to apply to grad school to do a master's in art history and look at these questions. And I had a lot of resistance to it because I was living in an ashram, I was doing meditation all the time, I had a very particular lifestyle, I was deepening my yoga teacher trainings and offering retreats, and I was this ashramite. And I was like, I don't want to be an academic. At the time I had felt if I go and do this, then that's pulling me off the path somehow. And so I felt really confused. But then if I was okay, if I'm following this vow, if I'm living from the heart, what I have to do is I have to go to grad school. And I don't know why, and I don't know what for. I don't know what I'm going to study exactly. I had a loose idea, but I just knew that I had to go. But I still deferred the offer a year to think about it longer because I had so much resistance to it. Lived at the ashram a year longer. Went to India, spent some time with my teacher there, and I asked him, I was like, what should I do? I only have 3 weeks left now to make this decision. I either go to grad school or I close that door and I have to reapply again if I decide to later. I was like, I had like 3 weeks to make this decision. And I was like, what do I do? And he said, unless it's pulling you away from your yoga, unless it's pulling you away from your art, you should never turn down an opportunity to learn. And I was like, but I don't want to go, I don't want to be an academic, I don't want to, do all these things. And I had so much resistance still. And it was like a week before I had to make the decision, it just became so clear to me. I was in Rishikesh, I was doing an asana practice on the kitchen floor of my Airbnb in Rishikesh, India. And I was like, I have to go. I have to go. It was like all these sparks like going off in my heart to go to grad school, even though I did not know why. And so I took that leap, and a few months into my schooling, I was kind of looking at different spiritual artists, how their visual language was inspired by their practice, kind of loosely getting like the lay of the land. And I had come across this article that had one sentence about Lauren Harris, who was a founding member of the Group of Seven, a great Canadian art group, probably Canada's most famous painter, arguably. And this one sentence had mentioned that he was known to have read a copy of the Bhagavad Gita daily, a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the great yogic texts coming out of India that I had been studying with my teacher at the ashram. And so I'm like, well, this is a really interesting correlation. This is a really interesting crossroads. Maybe this is why I'm here. So then I just so happened to be living in the city that had all of Lauren Harris's archives. So I go to the archives behind lock and key. It's this whole process, security checks, all this thing. And I get this cart that has like 15 boxes of files of Lauren Harris's journals, diaries, writings, transcripts of his talks, preparations for talks he was going to give. He had like a pile of jokes that he had kept and like shoved in an envelope that he thought were funny, like everything from his archive. And I was going through all of it, and I was thinking this is probably going to be about like Canadian art, nationalism, what it means to have like a Canadian art style. 80 to 85% of that was about God. Almost all of his writing was talking about the spiritual search, was talking about the sacred, was talking about the divine, was talking about how spiritual practice should be infused into visual language, and how visual language and spiritual art serves its greatest function. And it was a gold mine. It was an absolute gold mine. And I'm going to read you one of my favorite passages that I came across in his archive, which was the next great breadcrumb to this body of work. And he was writing about the role of the artist, and in this particular passage he's talking about musical composers, conductors in the orchestra, but really he's speaking about all artists. And he wrote, "When we listen to a great work of music, such as a Beethoven or Sibelius symphony, we feel it to be individual yet universal. And though it takes less than an hour to perform, we feel its spirit to be timeless. No doubt Beethoven and Sibelius heard great and universal music with the inner ear. They then had to get it down in notes on paper. That was the difficult task. They had to translate it from pervading universal music into a particular expression, contain it in a particular form, so that an orchestra and a conductor, if rightly trained and attuned, could play it back again into the universal for us." And so he's speaking about the role of the arts as this kind of intermediary, or the power of art that's made from a very sincere place, to kind of be like a springboard, that we can follow into something that expands far beyond the confines of an individual piece of music or an individual canvas. So it acts as this kind of springboard, this mirror for something deeper. And so naturally I was like, the next step is to go to the orchestra. The next step is to understand him, to understand this work, is to go to the orchestra. And so I go to the orchestra. I also happen to be living in a city that offered $15 orchestra tickets, front row, if you're under 30, and I was 29 at the time. And so I was so blessed to be able to experience like really beautiful orchestra music in such an alive way. And, you know, going into it with this lens and to experience it in this way, I've been listening to orchestra music for years when I'm writing, when I'm researching, but to place it at the center and to really like listen to it with the fullness of my attention and to follow it, you know, to follow it as like this springboard, it just sent me into this like really ecstatic place. And I absolutely loved it. And I started to contemplate the orchestra as this sort of like microcosm of reality, how everything in the universe, every type of energy, every type of movement, every feeling is expressed in some form in the orchestra. You have grief, you have longing, you have sadness, you have ecstasy, you have sensuality, you have triumph, you have terror, you have everything that exists in the human experience, everything in nature, the like rising energy of a sunrise, the like subtlety of like a moonlit night for contemplation, everything. The little ripples of water, the depths of the waves, like it's all there. It's all there in the orchestra. And so, you know, one of my teachers in the spiritual tradition that I've been practicing in, he talks about like Tantra yoga in this way of like, you know, we don't have to move up and out of life. You know, traditional yoga and a lot of systems is like views the world as something like an illusion that we have to move beyond, something that we have to move past, kind of up and out. But the tantric vision is that we actually can move in and through this deep sinking into the heart of life. We don't have to overcome the world, we just have to see it clearly. And so it's this very embracing path. And so one of my teachers uses the analogy of like light shining through a prism. It's one light, but when it shines through a prism, it refracts into all of this beautiful diversity. And it's like that's actually what's happening with the world, with creation. The one consciousness like expressing as all of this. And so I thought, there's only one sound, but the way that it moves through different instruments is what allows for diversity to happen. And so it's all weaving together through the lens of harmony, all experience, nothing is left out. And so I've been contemplating all of creation as like the orchestra or the symphony of the divine, all the qualities of creation through this lens of harmony and of beauty. And in that contemplation, I came across the Sufi teacher, Hazrat Inayat Khan, who writes The Mysticism of Sound and Music, which is basically the worldview that like the divine is harmony and all of this is music. And so a passage that he writes is, what we call music is the harmony of audible notes. But in reality, there is music in color. There is music in line. There is music in the forest where there is a variety of trees and plants in the way in which they correspond with each other. And so then I'm like contemplating all of creation as the orchestra of the divine. I'm looking at the life of different flowers and how they express all of the qualities of creation. I'm looking at the forest. I'm looking at my own inner world and how all of this has this kind of musical quality. And then I went to Vancouver for a visit and came across an Emily Carr exhibition. Just so happened that when I was in Vancouver, there was an exhibition of Emily Carr's work. And of course, having a bachelor's degree and a near master's degree in art history, I know who Emily Carr is. But I had never seen her work through this lens before. And so I walk into the room and I immediately start crying because her works felt like they were singing inside of my body. They're so musical. I was like, she was painting the music of nature. She was painting the harmony of creation. She was painting God as the forest in this very musical way. And her journals talk all about it. There's a passage I have printed out in the room over there about how she wrote that, you know, what is beauty? God. What is that all permeating force through everything? God. And so her music was singing to me, and I thought, I need to actually take this contemplation and infuse it into depictions of the world to add to this contemplation of the world as the orchestra of the divine. And so, for example, the two floral pieces in the other room, there's one called Lamentoso, which is this kind of droopy flower. Lamentoso is orchestral music played at a kind of mournful and sad quality with this flavor of mourning. And I saw this flower and it was like really drooping down and it looked so sad, but it was so beautiful. And it's actually like the heaviness of the sadness that pulls it into the light. And so it's this beauty of sadness. And then there's one beside it called Concerto, which is this pink flower surrounded by red. And when I saw that at the Tulip Festival, it's where the reference photo came from, I was feeling a little bit lonely because oftentimes in spiritual spaces, I'm the only academic. And then in academic spaces, I'm the only one that's like madly in love with the divine. And so I oftentimes feel very isolated from my environment. And I saw this flower and I was just like, that's how I feel. But then I was like, if this is all an orchestra, this would be a concerto. And a concerto is when one instrument, the uniqueness of it, its ability to create a sound that no other instrument can make. It gets pulled to the front and it's featured. And so there's one instrument, one musician that's steady at the front, and they're supported by the orchestra around them, and it's this kind of conversation. And so I was like, oh wow, actually the things that make us unique are what are celebrated in the orchestra. And so that one is called Concerto. There's this one in the corner here, Overture 2. There's Overture 1 sold in December, so it's not part of the exhibition, but an overture is like this musical introduction to a longer piece. It's introducing themes that are to come. And I saw this budding flower and I was like, this is like the overture of a life of a flower, and in art history, a lot of times size alludes to like something really important. If something's really important, they paint it really big. And so like, hey, look at this. Georgia O'Keeffe painted these massive flowers, and she said, I will make the busiest New Yorker stop to see what I see in a flower. And so she's like, this is really important. And so I wanted to bring this kind of focus to this like early budding stage that sometimes we can, brush over, that it's not full, it's not ripe, it's not beautiful enough. And like, how does that show up in our own life when we're, in the beginning stages of anything, and we're like, oh, it's not enough. So it kind of takes the like fullness off the pedestal and creates this kind of, hey, actually like this moment is part of the music also, and it's full of beauty. And so all of the pieces are inspired in some way by this contemplation. So I think we're almost at about time, so I won't go into the stories of all of them. But I do want to close with another passage of Lauren Harris's that I found in his archives, just as a kind of maybe springboard for as you view the works. I think a lot of times, I've spent years guiding folks through exhibitions, and one thing I notice is that so often people are like, what does it mean? And they're, intellectually kind of like analyzing, like, what would this mean? What is it saying? And while it's good to think about those things, one of the things Lauren Harris said was the question when looking at art is not what does it mean? The question is what experience does it contain? And so like real good art is infused with something. And when it succeeds, it actually takes you somewhere. And so the invitation, if the work succeeds, the invitation is to be in front of it and inquire, what experience does it contain? What does this bring up in me? How does this make me feel? Where does it take me? Does it expand my perspective? Does it deepen my relationship with reality in some way? Not just these works, but all art. This is a contemplation that I want to leave you with. What experience does it contain? And can you follow it into the heart? Can you follow it into the aliveness that it can evoke, actually? So it's paused right now, but I also do have a playlist that I curated for the exhibition containing all of the music that inspired all of these pieces. They're all deeply inspired by like one or two musical pieces each, which I would listen to very loudly on my headphones, and feel in the body, and then allow that to be infused into the canvases. So we'll plug back in the speaker, and you can hear the music as well. And if you're interested in going deeper into any of these topics, I also have a Patreon account where I do yoga classes, meditation practices, talks on art, poetic and visual analysis. And all of the works in the exhibition are available for purchase, except for this one, which sold earlier today. And so if you're interested in purchasing a piece, you can come and speak with me. If there's a piece that you love, but want it in a different size or a slightly different touch to it, I can do commissions as well, so you can come and speak with me about that. There's a guest book just on the table at the back of the room that I encourage you to sign if you want to leave any feedback, or if you want to put your email, I can add you to my email list. And is there anything else? Oh, I have some business cards there you can also take if you want. Any questions? I feel like that was a lot of talking. Yeah, Julie.
Kayla, do you have a favorite?
That one.
Okay.
I think that's my favorite painting I've ever made.
Oh.
Yeah. I if you've been following my art for a while, I would probably laugh when I say that, because I say that like every time I make a painting. But I really, really love that one. Yeah.
And what music did you play, like, with painting that one?
That one in particular, that was, I can tell you exactly. It's referred to as the morning song, but it is, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Peer Geint, Suite number 1, Morning. So that was the kind of main one there, and then also Time by Hans Zimmer, and Cornfield Chase by Hans Zimmer. Yeah, those were the kind of 3 that most influenced that piece. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm incredibly inspired.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that. It's really beautiful to hear your journey and to see how it came to here. And yeah, it's so deep and so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting. I mean, the Emily Carr exhibition is when it was like, I have to put all of this together through the world. And so to display the work that evolved from that here of all places, it's just perfect. So, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Have some tea, have some cookies. I'll be here till 4, so if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to chat with you.
Thank you.